Okay, so I don't normally do this, but I just recently saw the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic episode, One Bad Apple. And I won't act like it offended me, but I really want to talk about this episode because I know it's an infamous episode of the show, and it will be a while before I get to comment on how bad I think this episode really is. Yes, this will be a nightmare episode when I get to my Season 3 review video coming out. But I want to talk about how I would have written this episode if I was given a chance. You're free to agree or call me an idiot, I really don't care, but bullying-focused episodes are infamously poor across lots of cartoons, aside from precious few exceptions like Static Shock, and I feel like in the few hours after watching this episode, I thought of a decent fix for a lot of issues this episode has. For example, talking to an adult should really be the first thing you do, and treating that as the moral that everything would have been resolved if you would just ask an adult for help, I feel is too idealistic and simplifies a very serious and extremely complex issue with no real solution. Everyone's situation is different, and I don't believe that what this episode suggests is enough. So bear with me as I tell you how I'd have corrected this episode's structure, and maybe teach a few more morals I do believe are important for kids to hear. I should also state that I mean absolutely zero disrespect towards the writer for this episode. I don't know what the work conditions are for a cartoon writer, and I do believe that her other works like Hurricane Fluttershy and Family Appreciation Day demonstrate that she is very competent at what she does. With all that said, let me talk about how I would have fixed One Bad Apple. Now, how this episode could have worked is if it focused more on Babs as a character. If the episode had to focus on bullying and how to deal with it, it could have still worked, but it desperately needs to be overhauled. Everything could have remained the same up to the scene where the train comes to Ponyville, but have Applejack talk more about Babs and how she wants to make her feel at home, subtly imply that she's had a rough time living there, even without outright admitting that she's been bullied, to at least say that Applejack knows more than she's letting on. But don't make the eventual reveal that Babs was a victim come out of nowhere, as that could be seen as sensitive information. Save it for only where it's necessary, which we'll get to later in this video. Keeping Babs self-conscious over her cutie mark not having come yet would also be important. Everything up the Diamond Tiara and her lackey showing up out of the blue can stay the same, but have her be accompanied by her dad, Filthy Rich, and say something like he's just talking with Applejack over some business to do with the upcoming parade. It doesn't matter what, all that really matters is that his daughter has a reason to be here. Now this is just me, but I would keep the scene where Babs joins the dark side the same. However, I'd change this. Even if Apple Bloom and Scootaloo decide they don't want to be snitches, have at least Sweetie Belle decide to try and ask Rarity for help, because she already has her own morals as portrayed in this episode. But because she's not related to Babs, she did talk to Applejack about it, who acknowledges Sweetie Belle's concerns, but knows that Babs knows how it feels to be bullied, and because of that, she simply cannot believe that a victim would turn into a bully so quickly, especially if it's her younger sister's cousin. That would cross out both adults who see the issue but are powerless to stop it, and adults who can stop it but have reason not to believe it. The song can play whenever it be fitting here, but show Babs feel guilt over how she's treating Apple Bloom instead of gleefully tormenting her own cousin with no remorse. However, if she has to portray this level of malice, have Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon more frequently show up, so at least that way, it looks like she really is just trying to avoid trouble for herself. Most of the episode from this point forward can remain unchanged, because I feel like it's actually pretty good so far how it is. Really, where this episode gets really bad has to do with the ending and the third act in general. So let's skip ahead to where the CMC are making the golden apple float, rigging it to fall apart, and then having Babs to take over so they can humiliate her. Just, instead of having Applejack drop exposition for no good reason and out of nowhere, have the CMC gloat over how they're gonna humiliate Babs as payback, and as they see that float driving further and further down the road, they overhear Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon bad-mouthing Babs. What for? Well, one, they're both terrible kids, and two, they never really respected Babs at all. They saw that she didn't have a cutie mark, and they still were mocking her behind her back. Despite everything that happened in this episode, Apple Bloom still doesn't find it in her to hate her cousin. As such, she sticks up for Babs. And then Diamond Tiara comes back with a very poignant point. Namely that she and Silver Spoon like to rile up the CMC just because, but the fact that Babs would do it to her own cousin is something that she would never respect. And so she really feels no guilt over this at all. Meanwhile, Sweetie Belle comes across the shocking revelation that she now realizes what Applejack meant when she says that Babs knew what it felt like to get bullied. So they then rush to try and save her, but then they actually fail, and what ends up happening is that they develop an immense level of guilt over the thought that they may have really hurt her. But then they see her climb out just covered in mud, a way to communicate then that while it isn't justified to act like how Babs did, two wrongs do not make a right. This also serves as Babs' punishment for being so terrible in this episode. Applejack sees this too and rushes to see what all the hubbub is about, and that's why the CMC did this. and they collectively say then that they tried to get help, and when help didn't come, they felt they had to take matters into their own hooves because they were sick and tired of being taken advantage of. Also ended with Apple Bloom chewing out Babs for stealing the CMC clubhouse by calling attention to her blank flank, in addition to the fact that she sided so quickly with some of their worst enemies despite being nothing but nice to her, and that her new friends would not even respect her either since they attacked the CMC for what she is so self-conscious over. Heck, make her teary-eyed too as she calls Babs out to really strike the emotional chord that she feels truly betrayed over Babs' treachery. Not every bully can be reasoned with, but this is a family issue, and we can at least address when this problem occurs. The adults then, or really Applejack, learns that they were wrong to be so dismissive of what was a very serious issue for other kids. And the CMC, or the kids that we're talking about in general, learned that as much as it hurts to be bullied, it does not make it right to get revenge when you can end up in even more trouble for worse. Like, could you imagine if Babs died there? What she did was bad, but then they up and actually kill her. That'd be a terrible way to go. The reason I believe this would work is because adults oftentimes hear about accounts of being bullied, but they don't do anything about it, whether or not they don't believe it could even happen like Applejack did in this episode, or think it's being exaggerated. And oftentimes, adults don't even do anything about it until it's too late. Either the child has suffered immense psychological damage, or they probably even took their own life. And Applejack here learns the hard way that she should have been more receptive. As for how to deal with a bully, well, this episode doesn't talk about that because, quite frankly, like I said before, that issue is way too complex and complicated to cover in 22 minutes. And besides, there's no real solution to it either. It's too much of an issue to really cover. But the CMC at least do learn one way not to deal with a bully. It also implies something else which I think is very topical too. We don't want our kids to be holding any kind of weapons, right? No matter your stance on bullying, we can at least agree on that. And they're sorry to Babs, but she's even more sorry. She can then deliver a sincere, heartfelt apology for putting her cousin and friends through so much grief, and learns that it wasn't right to turn on her own family just to appease total strangers. That's 3 good morals that could have been taught at the end of the episode. And speaking of the end, Applejack needs to be the one to tell Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon off for acting terrible towards her little sister, and that she'll be talking to her father for harassing them for as long as she has. Now of course, not all adults will take your side on every matter, but sometimes they will. And it would be a good chance of redemption for Applejack to really show that she means business and people are not going to mess up her little sister like that. Now, I'm not sure how much I'd add to this episode or take out of this episode to make it fit into 22 minutes because I'm not an editor, but I do believe this episode would have been significantly better if it was actually put on TV and be at least a little more respectful to actual victims of bullying. Now, I'm no expert, and I'm not going to pretend like I am an expert either, but I have a lot of thoughts in my mind and I'm not afraid to share them. So if there's another episode of the show you want me to talk about and how I would probably revise, well, let me know down in the comments, and I might actually do it. You can also check out my Season 3 reviewed video here, or either the Season 1 or 2 videos because, well, Season 3 is probably not even out yet. Either way, this is Arantula, and I'm gonna leave. Bye-bye, everybody.